At the table, the president hosts a bipartisan group to talk immigration. We are at the White House. Health and Human Services leader, the president's pick, takes questions from lawmakers. We're on Capitol Hill. Nuclear threat. Talks between North and South Korea are in motion. Congressman Ron DeSantis joins us. Getting social. The Vatican is doing gangbusters on the internet. We have the numbers. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 9th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. In an extraordinary on-camera negotiation with bipartisan members of Congress at the White House, President Trump says he wants lawmakers to pass a bill of love to protect young, undocumented immigrants from deportation. But he reiterated that border security must be included. White House correspondent Mark Irons joins me with the latest. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. This meeting brought together congressmen from both sides. After the media left, a deal was reached, according to the White House, to help dreamers stay in the country and boost border security. The goal of finding common ground appears, at least for now, to be on track.
So I'm appealing to everyone in the room to put the country before a party and to sit down and negotiate and to compromise, and let's see if we can get something done.
But the president also says before he can compromise for the dreamers, he needs to see greater border security, an end to chain migration, and the cancellation of the visa lottery program.
That there are elements you're going to find Democrats support when it comes to border security. We want a safe border in America, period.
Still, coming to a bipartisan agreement won't come easy. Democrats like Senator Dick Durbin say they don't support the $18 billion the administration wants from Congress to build the wall, while the Department of Homeland Security claims the best way is the Trump way. Today announcing the president's commitment to securing the border is undeniable, saying U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions in fiscal year 2017 were at the lowest level in 45 years. Meanwhile, U.S. Catholic bishops have shown great concern for those who have crossed the border and now live here, like dreamers. Soon after the president's decision to end DACA, which gave dreamers the chance to legally live in the U.S., Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the Archbishop in the nation's capital, said, "I join those who urge that Congress move swiftly on a permanent solution that ensures these young people can remain in the only homeland they have ever known."
And the bishops continue to be strong advocates for dreamers. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops tells News Nightly that it's heartened by today's meeting at the White House. Lauren.
We're up against the gun, isn't that right? What are the next steps for this legislation?
Democrats and Republicans are set to resume talks tomorrow, but the White House is not saying when a deal will be finalized. There is a March 5th deadline for Congress to reach a solution for the dreamers.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The president was in the house for the college football national championship game in Atlanta, but he missed it. He missed Alabama's 26-23 dramatic overtime victory. Earlier, he spoke to the Farmers Federation in Nashville, hailed his tax overhaul as a victory for farming families, and says he wants to expand access to broadband internet in rural communities. The president renominates dozens of people for jobs in his administration. The list includes Kansas Governor Sam Brownback to be ambassador at large for international religious freedom. Senators declined to carry over the list of nominees from 2017. If confirmed, Brownback will oversee worldwide religious freedom. The Catholic convert promises he will work to protect people of all faiths. Abortion, the opioid crisis, and drug prices are just some of the topics senators raised as they questioned the president's pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services. Jason Calvi was there and has more on the confirmation hearing of Alex Azar. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Alex Azar is a former pharmaceutical and government executive. Today, he told the Senate Finance Committee that drug prices are too high, and he's committed to trying to lower them. He also answered questions about government funding of abortion organizations.
Drug prices are too high. The president has made this clear. So have I.
Alex Azar under fire today before the Senate Finance Committee. Drug prices dominated today's hearing. The former drug exec says he wants to lower prices, but's wary of a broad government role in negotiating down prices. Senator Ben Cardin, a Democrat from Maryland, peppered Azar about the Trump administration's reinstatement of the Mexico City policy. It blocks U.S. aid from going to international groups who perform or even promote abortion.
The manner in which this was implemented under the Trump administration is compromising our ability to work with international health organizations.
Senator, I am not deeply familiar with the ways in which any implementation of the Mexico City policy changed at the beginning of this administration compared to past ones.
A Yale law graduate and conservative policy expert, Azar clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. It's an opportunity he says he thanks God for every day. He also worked in the Bush administration for HHS before going to Indianapolis-based Eli Lilly. Azar would replace Tom Price, who resigned after reports of him using private charter flights at taxpayer expense. The panel is expected to vote soon on sending Azar's nomination as Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to the full Senate for a confirmation vote. When pressed about how he'll lower drug prices, Azar admitted it was a complicated issue. He says increasing competition would help. Lauren?
Azar would oversee the department that was behind the contraceptive mandate during the Obama era. What does Azar say about that?
At Azar's first confirmation hearing last year, he defended the Trump administration's broader exemption from the HHS contraceptive mandate. That opt-out fought for by the Little Sisters of the Poor and EWTN. He says the government really has to balance employers' conscience exemptions with the contraceptive mandate. Now, today, NARAL, Pro-Choice America, as well as Planned Parenthood, both slammed Azar.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Great reporting. Thank you, Jason. Controversial Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who President Trump pardoned after a federal conviction last year, is running for the Senate seat held by Jeff Flake. Arpaio tweets, "I am running for the U.S. Senate from the great state of Arizona for one unwavering reason, to support the agenda and policies of President Donald Trump in his mission to make America great again." Senator Flake announced last year he would not seek re-election. A breakthrough in talks between North and South Korea tonight. The rival neighbors take rare steps to lower tensions along their border. It comes as North Koreans say they will send a delegation to next month's Winter Olympics. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Officials here are welcoming what some are saying is the most significant thaw in relations between North and South Korea in years. Representatives on both sides are optimistic, but they warn this is just a first step.
Delegates from North and South Korea meet face-to-face for the first time in more than 2 years. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, making a sudden push to improve ties with his southern neighbor. The move comes after a year of growing tension with the outside world over the communist country's expanding nuclear program. In an effort to ease that tension, this high-ranking South Korean minister says the two Koreas have restored a military hotline on the western section of the border. South Korea also says it won't conduct any military drills during next month's Winter Olympics. Young people in South Korea welcome today's talks.
So I think it's a nice, symbolic move, even if it doesn't necessarily achieve that much.
And there's lots of fears, but I think it is important to have a talk and then them to participate as well.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says talks are proof the sanctions against the reclusive regime are working.
We do believe it's an indication that the pressure campaign is causing the leadership, the regime in North Korea, to begin to think about this can't go on forever.
State Department officials have long called out North Korea as one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a Christian. Simply owning a Bible, for example, could earn you jail time.
This week, Pope Francis raised the alarm about the threat of conflict between the two Koreas. He's encouraging all sides to build up trust. And President Trump, for his part, says he hopes things will work out between North and South Korea. He even says he's open to talking with Kim Jong-un himself. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. I'd love to be in that room. Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis joins us now. He's the chair of the House Subcommittee on National Security and recently threw his hat in the ring for governor of Florida. Welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be here.
We just heard Wyatt Goolsbee report that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says pressure from the U.S.-led push is what's driving this change in tone with North Korea. What role has the U.S. played in getting North and South Korea to the bargaining table?
The main role is that from the president on down in the administration, they've taken the threat of nuclear weapons in North Korea very seriously. This is a problem that multiple administrations have allowed to fester. President Trump said this is something that we're going to have to deal with one way or another. They've ratcheted up economic pressure, political pressure, diplomatic pressure. I do think that that is the reason why you see the North talking with the South.
Well, that leads to whether or not this really is going to be a turning point and whether it will lead to concrete changes.
I think it's good for the immediate future of this question of the Olympics. I mean, it was almost crazy to think that how dangerous that the Korean Peninsula is with the nuclear issue, that you're going to have an Olympics there if we're in kind of a standoff. And so I think the meeting has helped ease some of the tensions just for the immediate future. I think North Korea is going to participate in the Olympics. In terms of this being a major turning point for North Korea and how they deal with their nuclear weapons, I don't think we're there yet.
You've said many times that you worry about North Korea selling nuclear weapons to Iran, and anti-government protesters are really calling for that regime change in Iran. How do you think, how will that impact the arms race?
Oh, if I could have one thing to happen right now, I would choose these protesters, the anti-regime protesters in Iran, to be successful in toppling the Khomeini regime. It's an Islamist tyranny. It has suffocated the Persian culture for decades, and these people deserve much better. But think about what would happen if the Khomeini regime crumbled. North Korea would then lose its most willing buyer for nuclear capacity, because Iran is sitting on a lot of money based off the nuclear deal that Obama and John Kerry struck with the regime in 2015. Hezbollah will be starved of funds. Iraq, which is effectively controlled by Iran right now, will have an opportunity to turn more towards the West and be a positive force in the region. The problems in Yemen, you'd have so many problems disappear. I mean, the Middle East would still have issues, but Iran is the biggest problem. And of course, Israel would no longer have a country dedicated to its annihilation.
This is an important piece, but let's turn to the U.S. The Centers for Disease Control is going to hold a briefing next week on how Americans should prepare in case of a nuclear attack, including tips on surviving radiation. Is this really necessary? Is this as a result of the North Korean threat?
It's hard to know when sometimes you see things happening in the bureaucracy. I don't know what always motivates it. I will say this, though. Going back to Ronald Reagan, there's been a concerted effort, largely amongst Republicans in the Congress, to invest in a missile defense capability and a missile defense system. And as we watch North Korea test their missiles, and they've actually done better in some respects than I think we had forecast, just keep in mind that we do have a robust capability in terms of our missile defense.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis of Florida.
Thank you.
A train crash outside of Johannesburg, South Africa, leaves hundreds injured. More than 220 people were taken to the hospital, mostly with minor injuries. One train carriage derailed in the crash. The cause was not immediately clear, but authorities are investigating. And Swiss authorities near the famed Matterhorn Peak have closed ski slopes, hiking trails, and roads following a heightened risk of avalanches. It's left some 13,000 tourists stranded. Officials say no one is at risk. And in Australia, for the first time, same-sex couples can marry. The measure passed last year with overwhelming support in Parliament via a referendum. The country requires, however, a 1-month waiting period. A Vatican news agency says 6 nuns in southern Nigeria are home and healthy after spending nearly 2 months in captivity. Armed men kidnapped the Sisters of the Eucharistic Heart of Christ in November. They demanded a ransom which was not paid. The Superior General of the convent says, "We are happy, to God be the glory." As many as 64 African migrants are feared dead after a smuggler's overcrowded rubber dinghy from Libya started sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. The Italian Coast Guard rescued 86 people Saturday morning. 8 bodies were brought ashore and dozens are still missing. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliet, what do we know about the rescue efforts?
Lauren, so rescue divers from the Italian Coast Guard jumped into the water and managed to salvage dozens of migrants, some of whom were clinging to the half-submerged rubber dinghy in the water, and others who were treading water to stay alive. Now, apparently there were 150 people on this rubber boat that set off from a Libyan beach, a beach east of Tripoli, and after about 8 hours at sea, the boat apparently started to lose its balance and began to deflate.
Juliet, this is so sad. It's become such a frequent occurrence in the Mediterranean. Can you give us a snapshot of the entire situation?
Well, last year alone, 3,000 migrants lost their lives, and they managed to salvage almost 120,000. Now, in this case, the migrants were from sub-Saharan Africa, so from countries like Mali, Gambia, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Nigeria, Cameroon, and in most cases they were economic migrants. They were not war refugees, so they wouldn't even possibly be eligible for asylum permission to actually stay in Europe once they arrived.
Pope Francis, we know, is constantly talking about this, Juliet, reminding us of the need to embrace migrants. And this is an issue that he is so passionate about. Why?
Well, not long into his papacy, just 4 months after he was elected, Pope Francis made a very symbolic trip to the tiny island of Lampedusa, south of Sicily. It's the first point of contact that migrants have with Europe, if you will. And he said Mass there, and he wanted to commemorate the thousands of migrants who have lost their lives over the years in the sea. And more recently, at the end of September, the Vatican launched the Share the Journey campaign, which is a 2-year initiative aimed specifically at bringing all of us, even you and me, Lauren, closer to refugees and migrants, and encouraging us to sort of listen to their stories, to meet them, to reach out to them, to look them in the eyes, and to see the actual people beyond the statistics and beyond the misinformation.
And Share the Journey has been implemented, I know, at the parish level, especially here in Washington, D.C. Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, the March of the Three Kings, a massive turnout in Poland for an annual Catholic tradition. The Associated Press reports the special counsel investigating possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign wants to interview President Trump. The report says details haven't been worked out between special counsel Robert Mueller and the White House. It is believed a meeting between the two would signal the investigation is nearing an end. And one topic that doesn't look like it's going to be resolved soon, Mr. Gizzi, is immigration. Joining us now is John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. Always a pleasure, and a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, John. Right before the show, it was released that Steve Bannon, former counselor to the president, former chief strategist to the president, is stepping down from his role at Breitbart.com. What does that mean? Is this because of the, let's put it mildly, the dust-up that he got into with President Trump?
I'd say there's a pretty good chance of it. The fact is that Steve Bannon did become a celebrity of sorts, a national figure, and at one point was known as the man who made Donald Trump president. That didn't last long, and we saw that he was out. And I think the resultant furor stemming from Michael Wolff's book, Fast and Fury, was the final step in his career. I'd say one more thing, though. Every president has a Steve Bannon, it seems, someone who helps make them
quote unquote
president, claims the credit, and then is brought down in part by hubris. Franklin Roosevelt had a man named Hugh Johnson, a West Point graduate, just as Steve Bannon is an Annapolis graduate. He was someone who got to know the candidate Roosevelt through wealthy backers such as Bernard Baruch, just as Steve Bannon's conduit to Trump was the Mercer family. And in the end, he helped make the New Deal. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1933 and then fired in little more than a year. He went on to be a journalist.
Wow, he fell that far.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to immigration. Today in the briefing room, you asked Sarah Sanders a question about the border wall, and you said, has the president abandoned the idea of Mexico paying for the wall? What did she say?
She said, no, he has not.
And then what?
Next
she moved
question,
on.
please.
Yeah, right.
And by the way, my words coming from you, Lauren, sound so beautiful and so prescient.
Thank you. No, you delivered them very well today. The idea of Mexico paying for that wall always stuck in people's craw, I think, that, or in Mexico's at least. Yeah. And people weren't sure that was really the right solution. And now he's saying that it doesn't even have to be a wall. Is that right? It could be border security. Is this going to make his base mad?
I think it's going to make people start to ask questions about it. Look, have you seen the way this promise begins to diminish bit by bit? First it was, we will build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. And then gradually, right up to his penultimate statement on this, the Mexico paying for it disappeared. Governor Gracchus, the chairman of the Mexican Governors Association, said this summer that the fact he asks for appropriations and names figures is a sign he's not going to make Mexico pay for it. Now, as you point out, he's talking about security and that is a wall. I think it's going to make people who like the straight-talking, non-politician businessman Trump start to wonder if he's just not like the others who talks through both sides of his mouth.
And with that, we will leave it there. John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next, quite a following. The Vatican unveils some stunning social media numbers. And Black Nazarene, a feast day in the Philippines, attracts millions. We have the details. Today, the church honors St. Adrian of Canterbury on his feast day. He was born in North Africa in the 7th century and spent much of his life working in Canterbury, England, as an abbot and teacher. Pope Francis says the traits that characterize Jesus as our pastor are emotion, closeness, and consistency.
Brutto vedere pastori di doppia vita. È una ferita nella Chiesa.
At his daily Mass in the Vatican, the Holy Father says when Jesus teaches, he causes astonishment and moves hearts, but biblical doctors and scribes, quote, teach from chairs and aren't interested in people. The new Vatican news arm is active on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. How active, you ask? Across all of its accounts in every language, it has 4 million followers. The largest is Facebook, with more than 3 million friends. It has 635,000 followers on Twitter, 309,000 subscribers on YouTube, 125,000 fans on Instagram. And the news service isn't the Vatican's only popular social media account. Last year, Pope Francis himself exceeded 40 million followers on Twitter. Catholic officials in Poland say last Saturday's 10th annual March of the Three Kings took place in more than 600 cities and towns and drew more than, are you ready for this, 1.2 million people in Poland. The crowds included President Andrzej Duda, who attended for the 3rd consecutive year. Finally tonight, millions of Catholics in the Philippines celebrate the Feast of the Black Nazarene. The ceremony in Manila honors centuries-old statue of Christ. It is said to have mystical powers and perform miracles if touched. Local media report more than 17 million people take part in that. The procession lasted for 20 hours. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.